Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
So he's a Canadian philosopher, blogger, essayist, author, and the host of Free Domain Radio. He's Stefan Molyneux. He's the author of a whole bunch of different books. He's written on truth, the tyranny of illusion, and he's out in Phoenix to talk at the 2010 Freedom Summit. And we've got links up on Infowars.com to his website as well. So I'm excited to have him for most of this hour, or all of this hour and most of the next hour. The last 15 minutes or so, I'm going to blitz through all the other news I haven't gotten to. The food safety bill, that's like the Patriot Act's the opposite of patriotism and freedom. Big developments there, a lot of other economic news. But we're going to spend about an hour and 15 minutes with him today. And obviously this won't be the last time that Stefan Molyneux visits us. Great to have you on with us, sir.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here.
Really, instead of just playing your YouTube video, I thought I'd just get you on to kind of give you the floor for the rest of this segment. Then I've got my questions and comments to run through your worldview and how you describe these globalist farmers who are literally farming us as a commodity, as a human resource. I mean, they openly say this about us. Aldous Huxley wrote about it. I mean, you're not the first to notice this and won't be the last, but you articulately really have a deep peering view beneath the surface. So give us your boiled down synthesis of this.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I began to sort of notice this. I have a graduate degree in history from the University of Toronto. I began to sort of notice this, and one day I was looking at, in my room, I was looking at a map of the world, and it really struck me that while I thought I was looking at countries that were defined by cultures and religions and ways of thinking, I thought, you know, what I'm really looking at is farms, that the boundaries of farms. You know, like when you fly in an airplane, you look down, you see those checkerboard fields laid out beneath you, that's really what the world is, because what demarks one country from another is the borders of tax ownership. And I began to really sort of play with this idea, which then bore fruit in this video, that we really should be viewed as human livestock. And it is the most advanced form of human livestock to live in a democracy, because in the ancient world, slaves were directly owned. Like, you owned people, and they weren't very productive because they were so depressed and alienated all the time. And then you went through the Roman model, which was slightly more removed, where you owned people but you taxed them a little bit. And then you went through the feudal model, where you didn't own people directly, but they had to pay you off in order to work the land. But there was this amazing development in the 19th century, 18th and the 19th centuries, where the ruling classes realized that if they allowed us to choose our own jobs, then we would be as productive as could be imagined. This was really the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And so in the same way that a farmer will plant his crops further apart in order to have them be more productive, and he won't crowd his animals too much together, we've been granted a certain amount of economic and political liberties, not because our rulers have those values in the abstract or as a principle, but because it gives us the illusion that we're free, which makes us more energetic in the pursuit of our careers and the generation of wealth. But the problem is that the more economic freedom you get, the greater the productivity of the working classes, the greater the growth of the political parasite classes. It's sort of like it's sort of like putting a direct bloodline into a tumor. It just makes the tumor grow and grow. And so what's happening is the smaller the government that you start with, the larger the government that you end with. And I think that's the case with the American experiment, which is a noble but tragic experiment, where they said, let's start with the smallest possible government that we can get. And I think they did a great job of creating a small government, delineating it with the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. But what has happened since, is the amount of economic freedom and productivity that was generated by that liberty has created a massive tax base that has swelled the political and parasite classes to the point where what started off as the smallest government in the world has now turned into the very largest government in history, and the very largest government that anybody could conceive of. And that, I think, is the central tragedy of what has occurred. People who fight for freedom don't know that they're laying down the groundwork or sowing the seeds for future tyranny, and until I think we understand the degree to which we have an allegiance not to a political leader or even to an ideology, but to a tax bomber, once we understand that, we can begin to really work towards a free society. But I think until we see that, we're just kind of playing games in our cages.
Now, you're welcome to continue breaking down your view of this paradigm. I've got quite a few questions and avenues of discussion looking at what you're talking about from different angles. But please continue before I get to my questions.
Well, let's take it up to the present, right? Because I do sort of true news segment where I try to break down the news. If you look at what's going on right now, there's a budget deficit commission that's going on, and the results of it were all perfectly predictable. The dependent classes, all right, how is it that they turn us against each other, right? Direct human ownership is very unprofitable because the moment you start pushing guns in people's faces, they go limp, like intellectually, and they're not creative. They won't want to be entrepreneurs and so on. And so what you have to do to rule human beings is you have to set them against each other. And the best way to set human beings against each other, if you're a human farmer, is to not own them directly, but to take from the productive classes and create a dependent class. And the dependent class is rich and poor. It's the military-industrial complex. It's school teachers who are dependent upon the government for their summers off and their job security and their pensions. It's welfare, people on welfare, and so on. They're all dependent upon the state. And so the moment that people like you and I begin to say, we're not free, the entire paradigm is not free, we do not have the liberties we think we do, we're only granted certain liberties so we're more productive for others. The moment we begin to talk about a peaceful, non-violent, non-coercive solution to social problems rather than herding people around and pointing guns at them and selling off the unborn to anyone that they can find in order to fund the bribery of the voters in the present, the moment we start talking about that, the dependent classes start to attack us, right? And you can see this very clearly. This has happened to Ron Paul. It's happened to just about anybody who raises their voice in a cry of freedom in this land, that we get attacked by the people who are dependent upon the state. And the real tragedy, I believe, is that the only people who really care about the poor, the only people who really care about education, are people who are striking at the root of the violence of a status system. Because as we can see right now, this Budget Deficit Commission is completely predictable. What happens is the ruling classes take care of their own, and they only create a dependent class to maintain their hold over everyone and to make sure there's a group of people who are going to attack anyone who talks about freedom. So when they're talking about deficit reduction, deficit cutting, do they talk about repudiating the debt to foreign governments and international bankers? Of course not, because that's the class they're designed to protect. What happens is the dependent classes are shown to be completely expendable. So they're going to cut welfare, they're going to cut Medicare, they're going to cut Medicaid, they're going to cut Social Security to the point where people are going to go through extreme and extraordinary...
And then they're going to use those people that have been displaced as a political weapon, saying, if you want to get the welfare checks and the Walmart goodies back again, you've got to politically go for even a bigger government to rob what's left of the middle class, which the ruling elite, from my view, has decided to basically clamp down on.
No, that's right. And what happens is the fruits of violence are always disastrous. But what happens, of course, is that freedom gets blamed for it, right? So for some reason, people think that the recent Great Recession and the housing bubble and the tech bubble and the savings and loans of the 80s, that all of that resulted from some sort of free market enterprise, as if the government didn't run the entire currency, as if the government didn't have, millions of regulations and massive amounts of taxation and herding people around at gunpoint all over the place and throwing millions of people in jail. That is not a free society. And so all of the disasters that accrue to violence, the government has a handy scapegoat in the name of freedom. And that, of course, is the real tragedy. People are somehow blaming voluntary, peaceful human interactions for all of these massive disasters, as if you and I could run up a $13 trillion debt on our own. I mean, it's just astounding. But the dependent classes are going to get really badly treated in this next round, and it is going to be used as an excuse to attempt to extend the power and control, because the disease is masquerading as its own cure.
Well, I agree with you. Stefan Molyneux is our guest. We're going to come back from break, and I'm going to go through some notes that I've written about the basic thesis that he just put out that I completely agree with, because the globalists themselves have basically described it in very similar terms. And of course, Stefan's talking about how he noticed this himself. And I've had that happen to me so many times. I will notice something and think about it and then later read globalist publications where they are saying exactly what I thought, but then from their farming perspective. So it's just incredible how obvious all of this is, and it's hidden in plain view. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Stefan Molyneux is our guest into the next hour. Coming up in about 20, 30 minutes, we'll open the phones up. Got a lot of other key news coming up, but going through his analogy, which isn't really even an analogy, it's how the world works, of countries being farms, being plantations. Since we broke up from being just small bands, tribal bands, where people pretty much just elected who their chief would be because they could hunt the best and lead the best, and then it moved into the witch doctors and a lot of con artistry and things that grew from there into the control grid that we see today. I want to throw these points out at Stefan. The issue is, if you go back to the Renaissance, there was a major resistance against tyranny, and the system saw that where people had actually broken through and forced freedom, that it created prosperity. So they said, wait a minute, we're at war with the French, or we're at war with the English, or we're at war with the Dutch or the Spanish. If we allow more freedom in our country, more industry will come here. More people will immigrate here who are developing new sciences and manufacturing things. So it was a competition. But now the decision has openly been made to establish world government openly. To establish world government, run by these robber baron elite families who don't want a free market, so that no one can run state to state, nation to nation. So there's no competition between the farms, and so everything can basically be run like North Korea. And that decision has been made because the elites openly say the future doesn't need us. People aren't just cheap, they're valueless to the globalists now. They want to phase out and get rid of at least 80% of us. They have the robotics, they have the life extension. They don't want to share the world in the future with us. They have pure disdain for us, especially the hog-like domesticated class. So what do you think of those statements I just made?
Well, I'm not too up on the depopulation stuff, but I certainly agree with you that there is the ruling elite does not like competition to attract the best livestock. So an example of this, which we're all pretty aware of, is what's just happened in Ireland. I remember it was about 10 or 15 years ago, Ireland dropped its corporate tax rate to 13.5%, which was hugely lower than just about anywhere else. So, of course, everybody goes swarming all over there, and Microsoft and other companies, Intel, I think, set up headquarters there, and the Irish economy boomed, and everyone was like, oh, Ireland is going to be the next European tiger of economic productivity and so on. And I remember even saying at the time, it's like, well, that's just going to allow them to have a bigger government, and so they'll probably be one of the first to go bankrupt, and that, of course, is exactly what's happened. They've now gone bankrupt, and the EU is putting in as a condition of the bailout of Ireland that they increase their corporate tax rate because they don't want to lower their own. They don't want Ireland's to be low. So, yeah, there is a cross-pollination of control mechanisms, which is partly what the European currency, the euro, was all about. Now, everybody's dependent on each other, and so they're beginning to dictate cross-border-wise, thus lowering the competition and destroying the last capacities for the shreds of freedom in Europe.
Continue.
Well, the same thing is going to happen to Spain, and Spain has an economy that is absolutely enormous relative to Ireland. It's close to happening in England. England, of course, is slightly ahead of us in messing up the dependent classes by cutting their funding. So when Spain goes down, there's going to be a great challenge because the euro is going to face a massive undertow. It's going to be devalued relative because everybody's going to see. If you want to know what the European economic situation looks like, all you have to do is imagine an operating room or an ER, right? And it's got like 20 or 30 patients in it, and they're all bleeding. But some of them are bleeding a little bit more than others. So what the doctors are doing is they're hoovering the blood out of the ones who are bleeding the least, and they're pumping it into the ones who are bleeding the most. Well, of course, the only end product of all of that is all the patients are going to die. And that, of course, is not remarked upon in the media. It's just something that can't be talked about. There's always
but you forgot one part of the equation. We're going to come back in 1 minute and finish up with it.